Welcome to the Futureneering Podcast. My name is Filip. The aim with this podcast is to highlight some of the incredible science, technology, and innovation happening in Australia, and some of the key individuals who are helping to build the future. This podcast is sponsored by Neurotech. Neurotech have created Enhance, Australia's most advanced and comprehensive nootropic formula. Enhance is a nootropic, or brain supplement, that combines 10 natural ingredients, including B vitamins, plant extracts, and amino acids to help support your mind each day. In particular, Enhance can help support and enhance your mental alertness, your focus and clarity, help maintain your nervous system health, and support your energy production. Enhance is also a listed medicine on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. This means that it has been formulated, manufactured, and lab tested to some of the most stringent standards in the world. Neurotech also offers a 100-day, 100% money-back guarantee. So if Enhance doesn't work for you or you don't love it, you will get your money back. Listeners of this podcast can get 15% off today for Enhanced Nootropic by simply using the code Futureneering. Just visit www.neurotech.com.au and use the code Futureneering to get 15% off Enhanced Nootropic. On today's episode of the Futureneering Podcast, I'm joined by Stephen Bornstein, the CEO of Athena AI and Managing Director of Cyborg Dynamics Engineering. Now, Stephen was formerly trained as an aerospace engineer at Monash University and has held several engineering positions in prominent companies including BAE Systems, Airbus, and Rocket Lab. Now, Stephen is at the helm of two high-tech startups where he works on developing cutting-edge AI, robotics, and autonomous systems that service both the defense and commercial sectors. I've known Stephen personally now for a few years and closely watched his journey in both engineering and entrepreneurship, and I'm super grateful to have him join me on today's podcast. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me on today's Futureneering Podcast.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Philip.
I just want to give some of our listeners a bit of an introduction about your journey from sort of studying aerospace engineering at uni to your multiple engineering roles, and just a bit of a breakdown as to like that whole journey into where you are now as well.
Yeah, sure. So studied aerospace engineering at Monash University. Joined the Army Reserves when I was 18. Did that for about 1 and a bit years as a rifleman. Once I finished university, I started working at BAE Systems in the Weapons and Combat Systems Division. Spent 4.5 years there, rejoined the Army Reserves as an officer cadet, went through officer training, got commissioned as an infantry officer. Then I went to Rocket Lab in New Zealand to work at a startup. I was employee, I think, about 60 or so. Then moved back to Australia, went to Airbus for about 2.5 years. As soon as I came back to Australia, I registered Cyborg Dynamics Engineering. During that time, I was fortunate enough to win the Australian Young Engineer of the Year, which was a bit of an enabler with Cyborg in terms of like reputation, doors that it opened and things like that. Subsequently to that, won the first large contract with Cyborg to go full-time with Cyborg, which ended up turning into Athena Artificial Intelligence with Skyborn Technologies. And during that project, that was a 3-year project, the initial one in terms of funding, I started working on the unmanned ground vehicle program as well. And we got some grants for that. And then we proceeded into Defence Innovation Hub contracts and so on.
Wow, that's amazing. So before you got stuck into Cyborg and Athena, those previous engineering roles, were you doing a lot of heavy design engineering work then? Did they really sort of set you up for you in starting a business?
Yeah, I think so. If you're going to work in tech and deep tech per se, it's always handy if you have a lot of exposure to design engineering beforehand. It's always harder to learn that later on. So whether it was working on Nulka or Rocket Lab on Electron, or projects I did outside of work with the first robotics competition, the drone for Africa, the Royal Flying Doctor Service Cockpit Simulator, I was always hands-on designing things, building things, figuring out how to build them better. and yeah, very much design engineering with mechanical mostly background, and then control systems was my secondary discipline. But as I've
Yeah.
gotten more experience, most of my time is really in systems integration and testing and um, defining the problem up front and then making sure we test it correctly and go through the design process appropriately and then letting those discipline engineers do the work these days.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was going to ask whether or not you were very specialized in sort of the mechanical engineering design, or you had sort of like a broad spectrum skill set in terms of bit of mechanical, bit of electrical, bit of software, and all that to get where you are.
Yeah, so I'd say my core discipline would be mechanical, so structural, thermal, vibration, things like that. And
Yeah,
then control, I spent a fair bit of time doing control systems early on in my career. I'm not a software engineer, I'm not a data scientist. I rely on other engineers to support that. Really, at a technical direction these days, I'm focused on defining the problem effectively and then intersecting the technology and the defense capability so that we can, push out really high quality technology.
yeah, that makes sense. That's awesome. So, yeah, give us a bit more of an idea around you're working at Airbus, I believe, full time when you started working on Cyborg, and that was sort of your after work thing, trying to get that going. You said you won, was it a 3-year contract to start with? Was that for the UGV? Was that the first thing that happened?
So I did do one consulting job prior, one major consulting job, which was actually while I was at Airbus working on a small WASP replacement for one of the contractors that won a special notice Defence Innovation Hub contract. That was
Okay.
sort of our first exposure to the defence innovation ecosystem. And we were able to leverage what we learned there and identify that a lot of the computer vision target recognition wasn't really being explored effectively by the primes at that point in time,
Hmm.
particularly around the data sets and some of the assurance and the tactical decision making. So that sort of formed our proposal for the Trusted Autonomous System CRC. We were very fortunate that they needed to invest in Queensland companies as well. We put the right proposal on paper with Skyborn and Cyborg. We signed a non-incorporated joint venture, which is with the trigger point of incorporating being commercial revenue into that technology, into that intellectual property. And at that point, Athena Artificial Intelligence was spun out of the two companies. And now, I'm employed as the CEO of Athena Artificial Intelligence and still
Yeah.
support Cyborg Dynamics Engineering.
Awesome. Awesome. Can you tell us a bit about the reasoning of why you wanted to start Cyborg in the first place? Being a highly skilled engineer in all these different roles. What was sort of that desire and that switch for you to sort of take that leap into more of a entrepreneurial type role, but also doing the engineering as well?
Yeah, sure. So there's probably two aspects of it. The first was having gone to Rocket Lab, I saw a lot of top Australian talent going to New Zealand basically to create a piece of technology for US investors and then therefore create jobs for New Zealanders. And I was like, what are we doing here? Like, why is this not happening in Australia? Why is this tiny economy? And it really came down to the vision of one person with the CEO of Rocket Lab and his passion and desire to build that rocket and his ability to raise capital and mobilize a team and build an amazing product. So I said, where's the next market gap? Certainly in the defence sector that we could mobilise the team and do the same in Australia. And I'd worked in a number of primes at that point, and I felt that we were certainly very inefficient in developing capability and technology. 90% on the tail end of the project was just documentation, assurance, verification, and validation. And it was so inefficient for a large company to actually do creative design engineering and deep risk a capability for defense. So that was sort of where Cyborg, the inception of Cyborg.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that a lot. I think I felt that pretty viscerally and deeply as well, especially when I was working for the Commonwealth under Cassidy, sort of very, yeah, as you said, document heavy assurance type activities, not really like pushing the needle or moving the needle forward, getting your hands dirty and actually building like great capability.
Yep.
So yeah, I really can relate to that, and you having that sort of that drive to do your own thing as well. So I'd love to ask, you've obviously progressed quite well with both Cyborg and Athena AI, and you guys are doing a lot of cool stuff right now. What advice do you have for, I guess, other startups or small businesses that are either already operating and want to service defense as an extra customer, or people who would like to start a startup to solely focus on defense? How can they win contracts and get their foot in the door when they're coming up against all these other primes? What's the best way to sort of go about that would you think?
Yeah, sure. So there's two aspects. Obviously, there's the bottom-up innovation and then there's the top-down innovation. If you go top-down, you're going to find that primes will have BD representatives who are pretty matey with capability managers, so they can quickly understand what our defence's needs and try and capitalize on those needs. So a pure bottom-up startup will go, I've got this great piece of technology out of a university. How am I going to commercialize it? And is defense the person to invest in me?
Yeah.
If a defense innovation hub, Army Innovation Day or so on happens to have a priority notice that directly aligns with your intellectual property, then you're in luck. But otherwise, you're going to really have to have conversations with capability managers. You're going to have to demonstrate that you're the right person to mature the technology. You're going to have something that's reasonably novel. So there's probably a lot of aspects to it. And it depends what you're producing. If you're producing nuts and bolts, well, then the prime probably is the right person, because you could end up being part of a very large through life support contract or acquisition contract, and that's going to be a huge contract for you, even if you're just a manufacturer of a subcomponent or composites or something like that. And that's what you'd be approaching. If you're producing something innovative, you want to work directly with a capability manager and help shape those requirements. So when the major acquisitions come along, you're in a really good position for a prime systems integrator or a prime contractor to come to you, even though you're a small to medium business, because one, Australian industry content needs to be reached at the highest possible level from the tender. I'm talking about Australian tendering here. Export's a whole other level, which I can discuss after. But so that's and produce something that's novel, that defence knows about. It's part of their innovation programs, such that you've got the best chance that a prime might actually approach you when the major acquisition comes along. In terms of how you get funding along the way, if you've got something innovative, you've got Defence Innovation Hub, you've got a number of grants, the Sovereign Industry Capability Priority Grant, you've got the export grant, but really you've got to have something good enough to export, R&D tax incentives, and then some of the other programs like CRCP and so on.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Is it enough to sort of just be like, hey, I have a team and we have this interesting idea or some unique IP behind us? Or what level do you need to be at in terms of TRL as well? Do they want to see prototypes right off the bat, especially if you're going for the Defence Innovation Hub side of things?
Well, the Defence Innovation Hub's tiered with phases 1 to 4. So you can have a concept, and if you have a capability manager who's interested in something novel and the right team, then that's good enough to put in for a concept, for the concept exploration report. And then if you've explored that concept and de-risked it, you can get funding to build your concept demonstrator. So it really the Defence Innovation Hub supports things at every TRL, but it is highly competitive because every man and their dog who has an idea is now looking at that as an equity-free source of basically commercializing their idea. It's completely oversubscribed, and despite our good fortune at both Athena and Cyborg with the Defence Innovation Hub, I always advise people who are looking at getting into defence, go in there not thinking you'll get a Defence Innovation Hub contract, because it will take a while to get one, significant period of time. It took us 18 to 24 months to get our first one, of me being full-time at Cyborg, and we had 4 unsuccessful ones before we had a successful one. So it is a very oversubscribed system. It's a great system, but it is also extremely heavily subscribed. So you just need, I just want to disclose that up front. I don't represent the hub. I represent someone who's received contracts via the hub.
That makes sense. So you almost don't rely on that as your single source of success in making it in defense, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
What are your thoughts in terms of is looking for outside capital, whether it's private investment from individuals or venture capital? How does that work in terms of if you're building capability for defense? Are they typically interested, or do they shy away from defense, or what are your thoughts there?
Even in the US ecosystem, there's only 3 or 4 entities that are solely defense-focused businesses that have raised significant amounts of venture capital as sole defense businesses. There's sort of Rebellion, Shield, Anduril, and a couple of others.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the others have had to be in the dual-use domain, and if we look at the biggest VCs like Lux, they've only funded one defense-only business, which was Anduril. Palmer Luckey, 700 million net worth, threw all of his own money in. So if you do want to look at the private equity and the venture capital market, your life will be 10 times easier if you're a dual-use capability and if you're not a lethality system. So that just tends to be how it is because of ESG requirements of Australian venture capitalists.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess, yeah, dual use is key. That's something I hear cropping up and popping up a lot in a lot of different sort of defense conferences and events.
If you are in the lethality domain, they're like, whilst defense ultimately has this pointy edge of the spear in warfighting and so on, there are really only a handful of capability managers who are actually responsible for lethality systems, being, whether that's joint fires, small arms, combat robots, combat drones across the domains, arms, underwater vehicles. Like, there is really only a handful of people who are actually actively have that as part of their portfolio, being that war fighting tip of the spear.
Yeah, okay. Awesome. I guess, yeah, what I would like to ask as well is, what would you say, what capability gaps do you see currently for new startups who would like to get into defense? Has everything sort of been done already, or are there new things that can be done and should be done still?
Yeah, sure. So I certainly think that surveillance drones are now a commodity. I think unmanned ground vehicles that carry a load like packs and things and jerrys, they're a commodity. So in the RAS AI space, that's pretty well established now. Also, a lot of surface and underwater vehicles are quickly becoming commodities. I think where we're seeing capability gaps, areas that are capital intensive. So the hypersonics and the rockets and things like that, we're still not seeing in the sovereign space high TRL systems that exist yet. There are a lot of companies working on it, but there are, the Defence Strategic Review will determine, I guess, what the priority areas, and then I guess we'll see which Australian companies have higher TRL systems that represent those priority areas.
Yeah, okay. Awesome. I wanted to get your feedback on this, because this is something I sort of noticed going to the AdStar conference last year, and it seemed to be a bit of a theme where there's all this great, I guess, research happening, in particular in research organizations and academia, and all this cutting edge innovation by these researchers, but there doesn't really seem to be a tangible or commercial outcome or product that comes from that. Do you think there's a gap there between sort of like all this great research and products actually being commercialized? And like, is there a way to fix that and make it more streamlined?
So this has been going on in Australia for about 10 to 15 years. It's been a common problem, has been the commercialization of our university research. We have one of the lowest commercialization of research in terms of turning it into commercial outcomes for the university IP. Part of the reason that some of the studies that have been done on this have found is that you have high academic salaries for professors. It's quite competitive. So if you get publications and if you get patents, that makes you more competitive for senior positions at universities. And we don't have the same incentive programs for lecturers and people who develop novel intellectual property to then go out and consult industry and commercialize their IP to the same extent that US ecosystems would have. And then finally, the private equity market and the venture capital market is so much smaller in Australia. It is a lot harder to raise money for your business to then go and commercialize it. So it's kind of all those factors intertwined.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think, there has to be something that is done, I guess, to sort of put all those pieces together and actually create new capability and, tangible products. I think that's something that can definitely be done, and we should look to do as a nation, I suppose. Let's go back to sort of what you're doing right now with Cyborg and Athena. Can you give us a bit more of a breakdown as to the current products and technology you're working on? You mentioned UGV, some of the AI that you're doing at Athena. Can you go a bit more in depth as to sort of what you're doing exactly and what those systems are?
Yeah, sure. So Athena AI primary, I guess, mission statement is to provide decision support tools using artificial intelligence to support military decision making. So our two primary use cases is the joint fires capability. So the operator of whether it's a drone or joint fires, calling in artillery, air support, and then the commander. So how do we make more effective decisions as commander with our resources that we have available? How do we use the terrain better? How do we understand our enemy better to support the military decision-making process? The Australian, it's got different terms. The UK calls it the estimate. Australia calls it the military appreciation process. But really what we're doing is we're providing inputs into this process so that we can make better decisions, output being AI target recognition and exploitation using sensor feeds and data fusion, and then geospatial terrain analysis using satellite imagery and 3D point cloud. And we sort of fuse the two together, and we can do real-time battle tracking, real-time evaluation of line of sight, acoustic ranges, better route planning, better asset placement, and basically a faster, more efficient, and more lawful sensor-to-shooter link. So that's Athena AI. And then the Warfighter UGV, which is sort of our main unmanned ground vehicle program through Cyborg that we're joint ventured with through BF5. They make the base robotic platform. Cyborg does the autonomy, the software integration. Really, we're in a sort of a unique platform size where there's a lot of unmanned ground vehicles that are sort of the 1 ton base weight, 2 ton all up weight. We're sub 1 ton all up weight with a 400 kilo base weight. What that means is that we're more mobile, lower logistics footprint, we're narrower, so we can get through tree lines a bit better. And our sort of mission statement is to go where the soldiers go. So as a dismounted unmanned ground vehicle, yes, we can project forward using SATCOM and mesh MANET radios, but we can also directly support that soldier. We can provide cover, we can provide load carriage, and we can go in areas that the soldiers want to go. Whereas those bigger unmanned ground vehicles, they've got to go into more open terrain. We can be in that thick scrub where soldiers want to be for their own protection and cover and concealment.
Yeah, I love that. They both sound like sort of really important needs, and you're providing great capability there. What are some of the ethics and rules around using these advanced AI systems in defense? Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. So that's we've had sort of these conversations since we started the autonomous UAS effects program, which was really how do we embed aspects of the laws of armed conflict into our target recognition software. So we're able to identify civilian clothing versus military clothing, civilian vehicles versus military vehicles, red crosses, signs of surrender, like people putting their hands in the air, hands behind their head, waving flags, things like that. And really it was about being able to configure rules of engagement at a tactical level, and also embed the laws of armed conflict. So when you've got this really complex dynamic targeting scenario, you've got targeting a vehicle in an urban environment, there's dozens of people doing different things. Some of them might be military, some might be not. You can quickly determine, okay, is there collateral damage? How much collateral damage is there? And AI is basically on the loop telling you how the situation's changing and what you need to be aware of. The human still makes a decision, but with all these complex things going on, what they've found is humans can only track about 4 objects at a time. You can't even classify them all. So we can classify half a dozen objects all at the same time quite easily.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess as time goes on, these AI's technology will probably get more advanced in the sense that the models they'll be trained on will, teach it to sort of be able to better recognize different targets. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So we've got a mission statement, which is basically to turn around neural network models in a matter of days. So what that allows is if you're on operations, we identify that firstly, if you deploy to a new area of operations quickly and they're painting their military vehicles a different color, we can turn that around really quick so that the neural networks run on that. But now they're disguising their vehicles different, or they're doing something different, or we detect one specific thing and we want a network that just picks that up. We've got the capability to turn that around really quickly with a combination of synthetic data and a very small amount of real world data to get that out to the operators as quickly as possible to support that targeting and that information and surveillance pull on the battlefield.
Okay, fantastic. What is the plan for Cyborg and Athena AI going into the future? Do you think about that often? And sort of where are you going?
Most of the time it's just running the business day to day, but you kind of get to pause for a minute and think about where we want to go over the next 12 to 24 months. Athena AI is starting to grow into global markets. So in November last year, November 2022, we simultaneously supported events in the UK, the US, and Australia for all three customers. So we're going to continue to try and grow and capitalize on the Five Eye market. Yep. And then with the unmanned ground vehicle program, and we'll also start exploring some of the European market with Athena AI. So we've had strong interest from a number of European vendors, and we've got partnerships with a number of companies through Athena in the US, both Red Cat with Teal, they've got this great drone, the Golden Eagle, and then with Tomahawk Robotics with their Kinesis product, where they've created this ecosystem of drones and artificial intelligence where we're providing the AI computer vision solution. And then with the Warfighter UGV, we're going to keep trying to keep goals and keep exploring different lethality systems on the unmanned ground vehicle, improving our autonomy stack, and starting to explore the global market with that as well.
Awesome. That's awesome. What advice would you give someone who's up and coming, maybe someone who wants to study engineering or wants to get into this sort of high-tech product development and engineering roles? What advice would you give them in terms of should they go to uni? What should they study at uni? How do they get their foot in the door and make their path look clear?
Yeah, sure. So it's always going to be a very competitive workforce. So having a degree is going to be better than not having a degree in terms of getting into those high-tech companies. I don't know too many high-tech companies that are taking non-degree qualified people to be in these design engineering type roles. You can sort of be a tinkerer and a tech person, but in terms of you actually want to design stuff and gain those skills to produce really good products, I'd say go and study engineering or something similar. That's not the only pathway. The CEO of Rocket Lab never got an engineering degree, but that's an outlier rather than the standard way of doing it. And then from there, go and get extra hands-on experience. So Formula SAE or drone clubs, or build your own FPV drones, or go and tinker on your free time with Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and things like that, and actually learn how things work. So when you're just going to create a much better portfolio and make yourself more attractive to these employers.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess if you do have the passion for it, sort of just go for it and spend as much time as you can learning that particular thing. That makes a whole lot of sense. What do you see as sort of the future of engineering and technology, and in particular for the defense sector? So what are some key trends and where do you see it all going?
Yeah, I certainly think that we're going to see a lot more money and capability in the AI decision support. So even like at the planning level and on platform AI that actually helps have decision trees and figure out what to do in certain situations, not full control to a computer or an AI, but improving those levels of autonomy where we'll start to see human on the loop rather than human in the loop. So the human's preventing a robot from making a decision in a certain scenario. I still think robots on the battlefield, certainly in the ground vehicle space, are a few years away because you need quite large platforms to maneuver a lot of terrain. And if we look at maneuvering big cannons, you look at how a military does that. You need bridging kits, you need recovery vehicles. Like, it's not that easy to just get from point A to point B. There's a lot of work that goes into it, how you deal with breakdowns. So I still think we're a few years away, but I certainly think precision guided munitions and drones, they're an easier problem to solve to to get a bang from A to B. So we're just going to keep seeing more of them, which we're starting to see Russia, Ukraine. And then just growth of artificial intelligence. I think that'll just continue to grow with some of the recent chatbot stuff and so on that we're seeing, and some of the stuff that Elon Musk is doing as well. It's just going to continue to grow and become more capable and more thought-provoking at the same time, but we're just going to achieve much, much higher levels of autonomy in our artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it is pretty crazy what we're witnessing right now. I've played around quite a bit with DALL-E and ChatGPT, and just the prompts you give it and just the responses you get is just insane. You can just write entire blogs and posts just based off like a few sentences or a few words.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing, and that's just the beginning.
Yeah, so we start, that's just the surface, but, that's created a huge amount of hype, and rightfully so with what it's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Besides getting into the defense sector, what other areas of engineering would you think are good growth sectors or interesting, or something maybe that you would be doing if you weren't sort of operating in this defense space?
I think certainly if you want engineering with passion, the medtech space is pretty good. There's quite a lot of good companies in Australia that are working in medtech, Grays Innovation, Planet Innovation, a couple of other companies as well. So I think medtech is really good. It pushes the envelope by definitely helping people. We have some great medtech companies that are exporting capabilities globally. There's always interesting projects in the mining and resource sector in innovation. And then agtech is definitely an emerging field. We do a lot of agricultural work in Australia. It's a very tough market from a tech perspective because you're selling to individual farmers. So it's hard work, but it is, once again, it's quite rewarding, I think, for engineers who want to go out and help people and, help cultivate crops more efficiently and so on.
Yeah, definitely. Those are some interesting areas. What about on the aerospace side of things? That's obviously seen a lot of popularity and a lot of startups and companies going into that space, building rockets, satellite launch vehicles and all that. Do you think it's sort of becoming saturated, or is there still plenty of opportunity for people to get their hands dirty in the aerospace industry?
I think there's opportunities. I can't say I'm a market sector expert. We're starting to see a decline in launch companies. Their valuations are going down since the SPACs, less funding. Some of them are sort of wrapping up. We're starting to see similar with the tech crunch in general, with high interest rates and so on with the satellite companies. Then I know there was a big bubble probably 3 to 5 years ago on electric sort of essentially oversized quadcopters that would be the future of transport. That hasn't really materialized yet. So, whether someone comes up with a better way of doing basically flying cars, flying taxis and so on, I think there'd still be money for the right idea, but I'm not tracking any specific capabilities and market gaps in the aerospace sector that are that new hype area.
Yeah. Totally. Okay, no worries. I'd love to sort of, as a bit of a final topic, go a bit deeper into your day-to-day on your lifestyle. I always find it interesting because from the outside in, it seems like all you'd be doing day-to-day is just working on your businesses, and you might be just all day and all night. But firstly, what I'd like to ask is, what do you spend your day working on when you're at work? Is it still a lot of engineering and design, or is it a lot of business and operational tasks now as well?
So most of my day is around business development these days. And then if we look at sort of the traditional V of systems engineering, I look at the front end of the V, which is the systems requirements end. And then I'll look at the verification and validation because I'm very customer focused, which is let's get the problem defined right, the concept of operations, the systems requirements, the interfaces that we need to third-party systems because that has a business development effect, who we can actually sell to, who we can integrate with. And then on the tail end, making sure our products actually meet what our customer requires and then doing all the firefighting if it doesn't. I deal with a handful of the stuff at the lower levels of the loop if it's around my specialty or if the engineers are struggling to make a decision. We have to go back and consider the ConOps and the use case. But most of my time is around high level operations strategy, and really at the top end of the V being the defining the problem, the con ops, and then the verification and validation, and ensuring that our products meet our customers' needs.
Okay. How big are your teams right now, may I ask, at Cyborg and Athena?
So we've got somewhere between about 22 and 24 on payroll at Athena AI, including the directors.
Yep.
And then Cyborg is currently at about 8.
Yep. Awesome.
But then we've got probably another 6 to 8 at BF5 who supports it as well. So the UGV team's probably about 15.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, I wanted to get a bit of perspective around sort of at what level, would you need to be where you are, where you're sort of managing sort of the high level stuff, the customer requirements and the outputs, as opposed to, every day you're doing design and hard engineering work. So that's pretty interesting. What about
that threshold was about somewhere between 10 and 15 people. Occasionally I'll do some design engineering, but only in my free time, not during work hours.
Okay. Awesome. And yeah, with regards to your free time, do you have any? So what does your day-to-day routine look like outside of work?
Yeah, so depends. So if I work from home some days, which is good when you've got quite a lot of direct reports, usually I'll find enough free time to either go to the gym or do some adventure-related activity. Once a month, I'll go kite surfing, occasionally go mountain biking, do a bit of cooking in my free time. That's quite therapeutic for me. I worked as a chef back when I was at university, so that's sort of how I spend my free time. Go explore new places with my wife. That's about it, really.
Yeah, that's great. Do you happen to read any books?
I'm not a big book reader. If I unwind, I'm usually watching YouTube videos and TV shows. So
yeah, I get stuck into the YouTube videos and the podcasts. That's my thing.
Yeah,
that's awesome. And do you have any sort of tips for reaching sort of high performance and being like a highly productive person, or do you just get stuck into the work? Because I know some people like to spend all this time trying to optimize their body and their brain to be able to be in a peak performance state, but then some people just get into the work and just get stuck in. What's your sort of approach with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like quite a hyperactive person by nature. So if I'm not working and running around, so I don't really have a set routine per day. It's usually just dealing with various things as they happen, and that helps energize me. And I'm also naturally quite competitive within my industry as well. So those things naturally help me be quite driven to keep working and keep driving. So I can't say that I particularly have this optimal performance these days. For me, it's more around a mindset. I've probably had that mindset from quite a young age. I've always been quite competitive.
Okay.
I think I have found that I get better performance if I do eat healthier, don't have as much caffeine early in the morning, try and just manage it throughout the day. But ultimately, my best energy, my best performance comes from actually doing something that I'm interested in doing, and sometimes competing and trying to, not necessarily like push the team to levels that they have to work too hard, but really just pushing the technology and trying to get the buy-in from the team that we can actually build a really good product.
Yeah, okay. I love that. I think, the passion behind what you were doing and sort of, I guess, the why is definitely the biggest thing and motivator for giving people energy. Like, do you wake up fired up to, like, go work and do what you're meant to do type thing? That's definitely an underrated thing.
A lot more these days than, let's say, when I was working on a boring product.
Absolutely. I can imagine. Okay. So I'd like to, for like a closing sort of question, I'd like to ask, what are some key lessons you would tell your younger self?
I would say, for one, like, be patient. If you work hard and you build good connections, good things will happen. The most important thing that I've learned and that I say to some of the young, really smart people in the team is that the smartest person in the room won't win the contract. It's the person who's well-liked, that listens to the customer and is smart enough to then go and solve the problem for the customer. If you go in and say, I know what the customer wants, so like there's obviously the Henry Ford approach, But certainly in our line of work, we still have to listen to the customer, take that feedback on board, and always focus on that experience and obsessively build the best product for that customer. So I'd say, yeah, I think quite, and then the other one that my uncle tells me, who's had a very different business, which is loose lips sink ships. So if you think that something you say might get back to someone or might have a negative effect on your business or, on a potential contract, just you got to keep it to yourself. There's plenty of times on LinkedIn and so on where I've wanted to say what I thought about things, but then I've realized very quickly, that might have an effect on the team and people's job security and so on based on how that might be perceived politically or so on. And I've, in certain instances, had to put the team's needs first in that regard.
Awesome. That's some great advice.
Some people would call me a sellout for that, so who knows?
Yeah, I'm sure they would. Before we head off and close the podcast, I'd let people know, where can some people find you? Where can they go to learn more about you or Cyborg or Athena AI? Maybe someone's in engineering and they want to potentially come work for you. If you have any roles open, where can they find you?
Yeah, sure. So we've got the contact us page at Cyborg Dynamics Engineering. We've got the same at Athena AI, athenadefense.ai. And then, people can hit me up on LinkedIn as well. It's very rare that I don't accept a request on LinkedIn, so feel free to private message me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for joining me on today's podcast, Stephen. It's been great. Good to learn from you and chat as usual. So
no worries.
Thank you for taking the time.
Take it easy. See ya.
Thanks. Have a good night. Bye-bye.